Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review for you all, so hopefully find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from Italy. This is spoken in the majority English language, a little bit of Italian language, English subs, released in the year 2023, directed by Federico Zampaglione, and this film is called The Well. So The Well is about a woman who works for her father in a family-owned art restoration business, and she's tasked with going to the rural countryside of Italy to restore this ancient painting. So when she gets to this mansion owned by this very mysterious woman, the woman tells her about the history of this painting, how important it is to her and the community, and that if she restores it, she's going to be handsomely rewarded. But if she chooses to leave at any time, she's going to be penalised, and that's going to have a devastating effect on her business. So she has no choice but to go through with this, but the more she works on the painting, the more she starts to have these vivid nightmares. And she believes these nightmares are connected to this painting, but because she can't leave, she just has to tough through it. But unfortunately, eventually she can't differentiate between what's a dream and what's reality, which is going to put her life in danger. So what happens at that point on? Something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Well. For those of you who are massive fans of Italian horror, movies from Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, Mario Bava, those horror filmmakers that really put Italy on the map, Federico Zampaglione is definitely a director that's going to appeal to you, because he does have a lot of trademarks that make Italian horror what it is. And so with really good practical gore effects, really good atmosphere, and so that was something that he had in his other films. But coming into The Well, I thought the trailer looked very enticing, and I was hoping that Federico Zampaglione would go on from the mistakes he's made in his other films and capitalise upon, and The Well was going to be something that was going to be hard to forget, because it looked very nasty, it looked very gothic, and I thought, alright, that's a recipe for success. And so I had my fingers crossed that this would be an absolute knockout, and after watching The Well, unfortunately this became a massive disappointment, because this does fall down the trap of extreme horror, but there are some aspects of this movie that actually really work to prevent it from being a complete waste of time. And the biggest aspects that were positive in this film was the atmosphere. Atmospherically, this is very dreaded, very gothic, and actually very reminiscent of 1990s Stephen King adaptations, where it was very low budget and just had a very, it was lacking colour, it was lacking positivity, it was lacking warmth, and so it had a very deep, dark, cruel feel to it, which makes you feel very uncomfortable. And that discomfort is intensified through the really nasty, repulsive gore effects that this movie has. I was really impressed by, well, what these filmmakers actually did in the kill scenes. These kill scenes actually were very, very painful, and that was something that is reminiscent of classic Italian horror, especially a movie called Zombie, where you marvelled at all the depravity, but there was a sense of pain that made it really cruel and nasty, and so it was very uncomfortable, and it made you feel sick. And that's exactly what happened in The Well. There were some scenes in this movie that actually shocked me, and that is trademark of Italian horror. So if you are an Italian horror diehard, then this is a movie that's going to appeal to you, because it does have the trademarks of what makes Italian horror what it is. And so that was something that I actually liked. I thought the cinematography and the gore effects actually it was a recipe for an absolute success. But unfortunately, the reason why this movie doesn't work is because nothing else complements these two. This is a movie that neglects the necessities of what makes a good movie, and what makes a good movie is solid characters, solid script, and a really good story. But unfortunately, because it's more interested in repulsing you as far as the visual is concerned, it just doesn't have the impact. Therefore, it doesn't realise the ability that it had. The lack of self-awareness becomes really disappointing, because I thought as though there was a much better film in here. So the script I thought was actually quite cringeworthy in some instances. I thought the acting was quite mediocre, because the script doesn't allow them to really blossom into anything other than a template waiting to be slaughtered, because it's a showcase and then an exhibition in gore effects. And so this should have been a short film, because as a feature film it just doesn't work, because it does become very tiresome, because once you can become desensitized to the violence, you realise the movie just doesn't have any other tricks up its sleeve, because the story you've seen time and time again. I thought the characters, as I said, they're paper thin, you just don't care what happens to them, and so it's basically, how is the next character going to die in the most grotesque way, instead of actually fearing for them and hoping they don't die in the grotesque way. But because they're templates for gore effects, I just never felt as though I could really gravitate to the situation. If you can't gravitate to a situation, unfortunately, your movie really falls flat. And so it's way too long for its own good, because of the fact, as I said, it neglects the necessities or makes a really good film. And unfortunately, this is a common occurrence with really extreme horror films. It's just basically cheap shocks and basically repulsing you on a visual base can only take you so far. And so unfortunately that is the reason why I was really disappointed with The Well. I'm not recommending this. If you are an extreme horror fan, you're going to like the gore effects, but unfortunately you're going to start to realise, alright, what else do they have to actually make me want to actually follow through with this? And unfortunately at the end of the film I just thought to myself, it really didn't have anything else. And so that was a great disappointment, and that's the reason why I'm only going to give The Well 1 star. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time watching movies, and I'll see you later.